peacefully. And in response to that, the general racist atmosphere was whipped up, which would lead to mobs of white men going and brutally suppressing the organizing of people for their very rights. And this was also after World War I, when soldiers, black and white, were coming home, and black soldiers having fought supposedly for freedom, coming back and having no freedom when they return home. And then the white soldiers themselves not getting the economic benefits that they were promised. But there was a headline that was ran in the Dallas Morning News, and I used to live in Dallas for about 3 years. I graduated high school there. And this was in response to the development of the Black Sharecroppers Union in Arkansas, in a town in Arkansas, and the massacre of 100 to 200 black men by white racist mobs. And this was to justify that massacre. And the Dallas Morning News headline read, "Negroes seized in Arkansas. In Arkansas, riots confess to widespread planned massacre of whites today." What they were really doing is organizing. They were sharecroppers and they wanted to organize for their union rights. And in response to that, and the white mob was made up of white businessmen and small farmers. In response to that, 79 black men were tried, 12 given the death penalty. None of the people who participated in the massacre of these black men was tried. Later, the sentences of these men were overturned. But and the average sentence of the people who weren't given the death penalty was 21 years in prison. And this was in 1919. Also that year, some of the headlines from the New York Times, one read, "Every week the militant leaders gain more headway. They may be divided into general classes. One consists of radicals and revolutionaries. They are spreading Bolshevist propaganda." It was very much against communists and socialists as well. "It is reported that they are winning many recruits among the colored race. When the ignorance that exists among Negroes in many sections of the country is taken into consideration, the danger of inflaming them by revolutionary doctrine may be apprehended. The other class of militant leaders continue their agitation to fight against all forms of color discrimination. They are for a program on uncompromising protest, to fight and continue to fight for citizenship rights and full democratic privileges." So they deserve to be massacred because of that. Another headline, in an article in the New York Times, "Negroes must form cotton workers unions." This was a pamphlet that they found when they were going through the stuff of some of the people who had been killed, and that was turned over to the police or some officials, and this was printed in the New York Times. "Negroes must form cotton workers unions. Southern white capitalists know that the Negroes can bring the white bourbon South to its knees, so go to it." Additional evidence has been obtained of the activities of propagandists amongst the Negroes, and it is thought that a plot existed for a general uprising against the whites. A white man had been arrested, and alleged to have been preaching social equality among the Negroes. This was sort of the atmosphere that was being generated by the media at that time, when really it was a question. What was really happening is people fighting for their basic rights. It says nothing about any people arming themselves, but at that point, when you have so many riots and so many massacres of people, oppressed people have the right to arm themselves. In the case of yesterday I just read, or today, this morning, I read of the 5 black men who were shot by a white man in a pickup in Tulsa. 3 of them were murdered. But it reminds, none of us were alive during that period, but in 1921, for those who know about it, it reminds you of what actually occurred there. Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the Greenwood section had one of the most prosperous black communities. And the reason being is because it was illegal for black people to shop outside, to go into certain areas. And so you were forced to spend and to build up the community in order to survive. And so it was prosperous. And And a young black man who was 19, bumped into a white woman who then screamed, and the Tulsa Tribune reported that the black man had raped this young woman, which she always denied, and that led to a massacre of over 200 black people being slaughtered in the Greenwood section of Tulsa, being burned down to the ground. That area was dubbed Black Wall Street. And the Tulsa Tribune was noted for being a racist newspaper. In fact, I can't remember the governor at that time, and I'm not saying that he was generally progressive, but he suspended certain democratic rights to deal with the KKK threat and was later impeached for having done that. But some of the people who led the campaign were people who had started the Tulsa Tribune. And before that even, as it relates to the progressive period after the Civil War in this country, the Reconstruction era, when at a time it was actually illegal to discriminate on anyone as far as in public accommodations. Discrimination was actually illegal because of the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which was overturned in 1883. And at that time, the 13 of the 14 largest newspapers in the country supported the Civil Rights Act being overturned.